quotation I saw in medical school by Thomas Edison. It said, "The doctor of the future will give no medicine, but instead will interest his patient in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease." And one of Thomas's brighter ideas. And when I saw this quote in medical school, I just passed it right on by. I went to the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Chicago, and I was so into becoming a real doctor, and real doctors do real doctor things. They deliver babies, they fix broken arms, they sew up lacerations. That's what real doctors do. And diet was boring stuff. And nutrition, yeah, you send them down to the dietitian, and they figure out a 2,000 calorie diet, and don't bother me. And that's how I practiced medicine for the first 8 or 10 years of my career. Well, I have soon, or I have late, come to realize how important what we eat really is in the creation and prevention of so many of the diseases that we see today. And I'll tell you how I came to those realizations. Now, the North American diet has changed. This is not going to be a technical lecture, but I did want to show you this one graph because there are some very significant lines here. The two top lines, the lavender line and the yellow line, are the amount of plant-based foods that are consumed in the United States and in Canada as well. And this is back in 1909. You can see we were eating a lot of grain products. We were eating almost 300 pounds of wheat and barley and other grain products, and almost 200 pounds of potatoes a year. Look what happened in the intervening 85 years. Our consumption of wheat and grain products have fallen to half of their 1909 level, and our potato consumption has fallen to half of their 1909 level. Look what happened to the amount of flesh foods that we are eating. The amount of milk we consume has more than doubled. Our beef consumption's gone up by 50%, and our chicken consumption's gone up by 280%. We are eating a tremendous amount of animal flesh, and we have essentially exchanged a plant-based diet for a meat-based diet. And the results have been just disastrous for both our health and the environment. Consider how much animal flesh most North Americans eat. In their lifetime, the average meat-eating American is going to eat 15 cows. Going to eat 24 hogs, eat 12 sheep. She will eat 900 chickens and 1,000 pounds of assorted animals that either swam in the water or flew in the air. That is a tremendous amount of animal flesh to be pouring through the human bloodstream year after year. No wonder we wind up with clogged arteries and high blood pressure and cancers and a lot of other diseases, and I'll show you how those two are related. Let's talk about the health effects of an animal-based diet. Here it is, the great American dietary catastrophe in all its glory. I grew up thinking this is good food. What's for lunch, Mom? Oh, I got something good for you, son, she'd say. And she would give me some food like this. And my mother didn't know, and your mother didn't know. They didn't know that the sausages and the eggs and the ham were just loaded with fat and cholesterol. And this is a coronary artery thrombosis waiting for some place to happen. Now, what is the effect on your body when you eat food like this? Well, the effect was brought out very dramatically to me about 10 years ago. I was on the cardiovascular anesthesia service. That's the service that deals with people's hearts and blood vessels. And like all good anesthesia residents, I was making my rounds one evening to see my patients for next morning's surgery. And the last patient I was seeing, I pulled back the curtain, and there was Mr. Phillips. Nice fella, but he was just huge. He weighed 290 pounds. And he was booked for a 4-vessel coronary artery bypass procedure. He weighed 290 pounds. 290 was also his systolic blood pressure. It was also his cholesterol level. It was also his blood sugar level. I called him Mr. 290. Nice guy, but really clogged up in his arteries. And because it was late at night, it was too late to call the blood drawing technician up to draw his blood test, I drew his preoperative blood work into a glass tube. And I put it out at the nurse's station, and later I came by to pick up the blood tube and take it down to the laboratory. And when I looked at the tube of blood, I couldn't believe my eyes. When you draw blood into a glass tube and let it sit there for an hour, it separates out into two parts, and the red clot settles to the bottom, and the liquid part of the blood, the serum, rises up to the top. Here you see two tubes of blood, and the tube on the left is normal serum, is normal blood. Here you see the dark red clot. And this golden yellow liquid, this is normal serum. This is what your blood is supposed to look like. But I looked at Mr. Phillips' tube, and it was just shocking. The serum floating in his tube was thick and greasy white. It looked like Elmer's glue. It stuck to the sides of the tube when I shook it. I went back into the room. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a double cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized what I was looking at was all the fat in the beef burger, and the butter fat, and the cheese, and the butter fat, and the ice cream, and the butter fat, and the milk had oozed out into his blood and turned his blood fatty. It's a well-known clinical phenomenon. It's called lipemia, and it happens every time you eat a fatty meal. You turn your blood fatty, and your blood stays this way for 4 hours until your liver can clear it out of the bloodstream. If you are like most North Americans and eat bacon and eggs for breakfast and a cheeseburger for lunch and fried chicken for dinner and ice cream for dessert, you're keeping your blood fatty all day. The stuff never clears out of the bloodstream. You keep your blood fatty for 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. What do you think is going to happen to the arteries carrying all that fat? I will show you what happens to the arteries carrying all that fat in a few minutes, but it's a disaster. There's a lot of fat in the North American diet, and it's hidden in most foods. You can see the fat around a T-bone steak, but most of the fat is in the muscle of the animal, and it's hidden in the dairy products. And most of the folks who present food to us don't want us to think about the fat, especially the fast food industry. They really don't want you to think about how much fat is in their burgers and hot dogs, except one chain of fast food restaurants in Los Angeles. There is one burger chain that is very forthright about the reality of the fat content of their diet, and they come right out and tell you clearly on their marquee about the product that they're selling. Now, if you stood outside the exit door of this restaurant or McDonald's or any other fast food restaurant where people are shoveling in their cheeseburgers, if you stood at the exit door with a needle and a syringe in your hand and drew blood on the people walking out the exit door, what you would see is most of the blood would be as fatty as Mr. Phillips' blood tube. Now, they're all in there making the blood fatty. If you ever have a big cheese pizza and a bowl of ice cream afterwards and you feel a little greasy on the inside, it's because you really are. You really go greasy on the inside. Animal fat comes in 3 flavors in the North American diet. It comes in the form of red meat, and the fat is in the meat. It is in the fibers of the animal's muscle, and just trimming off the white fat around the edge of the steak really does not lower the fat and cholesterol content significantly of the meat. So red meat is the #1 source of fat and cholesterol in the North American diet. The second is the yolk of hen's eggs. The egg of a chicken is meant to hatch baby chicks. And the yolk of the hen's egg is one of the most concentrated gloms of fat and cholesterol on the planet. It is made to power that baby chicken for 21 days with no other energy. And when you run egg yolks through your bloodstream, you turn your blood fatty, just like Mr. Phillips. And the third source of fat in the North American diet comes from that white fluid that comes out of the udder of a cow. Now, cow's milk is a high-fat fluid exquisitely designed for turning a 65-pound calf into a 400-pound cow in a year. That is what cow's milk is for. Now, whole milk has a butterfat content of 3%. That's the cream that rises up to the top. And you drink a 3% solution of butterfat, you're going to turn your blood fatty, as will a 2 and 1% solution of butterfat. But at the dairy, the butterfat is skimmed off and they concentrate it into huge vats, half the size of this room. And they concentrate the fat to 50, 60, 80, 90% fat. This stuff is so thick you can walk across it. Why do they do that? Well, they do that so you will buy it and eat it. The butterfat is mixed up with air until it hardens into chunks called butter. The butterfat is mixed with sugar and frozen and sold as ice cream. The butterfat is mixed up with cocoa powder and sugar and sold as milk chocolate. Butterfat is mixed up with bacteria and allowed to ferment until it turns into sour cream. A lower fat version is called yogurt. And the butterfat is mixed up with calf stomach and bacteria and allowed to ferment for about 6 weeks till it hardens into chunks called cheese. These are all forms of butterfat. The folks at the dairy want you to buy the butterfat and eat it. And when you do, you turn your blood fatty. There's absolutely no reason to run butterfat through your bloodstream at any time, and I'm submitting to you that you'll be a lot healthier and happier if you do not. Cow's milk is for baby calves. You have no more need of cow's milk than you do giraffe milk or horse milk or rat milk. Now, back to Mr. Phillips. Nice fella, but I was impressed with all the fat in his bloodstream. We took Mr. Phillips down to the operating room, and I gave him 1,000 micrograms of fentanyl and put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest and opened up his aorta and opened up his coronary arteries. And what the surgeon started pulling out of Mr. Phillips' arteries were great, long, yellow, greasy, sausage-like formations of fat that looked like this. What you're looking at is a plug of material called atherosclerosis. And this is the plug of fat that built up in a man's arteries. The artery was a tube coming out at you from the screen. The artery wall has been cut away, and you're just looking at the fat that built up. It started around the edge of the blood vessel and started moving in on the blood flow channel as the years went by. And the blood flow channel got smaller and smaller and smaller till only this dark red spot was left for the blood flow to come through. And when a clot formed here, it stopped the blood flow completely through that artery. And because it happened in this man's right coronary artery, it stopped the blood flow to his heart and bought him a ticket to the autopsy table. This is the #1 cause of death of people in North America. Every 30 seconds on this continent, Canada included, somebody grabs their chest and falls over with a heart attack. This is animal fat clogging up the arteries. When you send this material down to the pathologist and you ask him to analyze it, the report always comes back the same: saturated fat and cholesterol. It's animal fat. The pathology report never, ever, ever contains the words remnants of broccoli, rice, and tofu. It's animal fat. The good news is when you stop running animal fat through your bloodstream, this stuff melts away. This stuff will come off the artery walls, and arteries can open up. And Dr. Dean Ornish in California and Dr. John McDougall and a number of other physicians are now routinely reversing atherosclerosis, having people cancel their coronary artery bypass surgery because they changed their diet and their arteries have opened up. That's the good news. Here is the process happening. Here are 6 arteries coming out at you from the screen. The dark red circle is the artery wall. The pink material is the atherosclerotic material clogging the artery. The white spot is the blood flow channel, which is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Any organ dependent upon this blood vessel for its blood flow is in trouble. Fortunately, it's a reversible disease. This atherosclerotic material clogs arteries all over the body. It's just a matter of which artery to which organ clogs up first that gives you the symptoms. If the yellow atherosclerotic fat builds up in an artery going up to the brain, you will suffer a stroke. If it clogs an artery going to your kidney, you'll suffer kidney failure or high blood pressure. If the atherosclerotic material accumulates on the walls of large blood vessels like the aorta that takes blood from the heart down to the abdomen and legs, the artery walls become damaged and weaken. They lose their strength. And the high pressure in the blood vessel causes the artery to balloon out, forming an aneurysm, which can then rupture, leading to emergency surgery or death. If the yellow atherosclerotic material clogs up an artery going to a loop of intestine, the general surgeon will open your abdomen and remove that loop of bowel. If the atherosclerotic material clogs up an artery going to a toe or foot, you will watch that toe or foot turn dark and gangrenous, and you'll sign permission forms for amputation. And if the atherosclerotic material clogs an artery going to the heart, you will suffer crushing chest pain when you walk, called angina pectoris. Or if it clogs the blood flow completely and damages the heart muscle, that is a heart attack. People, this is all the same disease. We are talking about animal fat essentially clogging up the arteries throughout the body, and it's the #1 cause of death and disability in North America. And this is essentially a disease of people who eat animals and the products made from animals. You almost never see these diseases in pure vegetarians. And William Costelli, the doctor who runs the Framingham Heart Study, says he has never seen a heart attack in anybody with a cholesterol below 150, and there's good reason for that. Why does this happen? Because all fats are not created equal. There's a fundamental difference between animal fats and plant oils. Animal fats contain cholesterol. No plant food contains cholesterol in any significant amount. It is an animal product. And very importantly, animal fats are highly saturated. They've got lots of hydrogen atoms hanging on them, and that makes animal fats very stiff. In fact, animal fats are solid at body temperature. If you're in a kitchen on a summer day and you've got a piece of T-bone steak on the counter and it's 98.6 degrees out, the same as your body temperature, the fat on that beefsteak is solid. It's a nice white chunk sitting there. If you have a bottle of olive oil on the same table at that same temperature, it's liquid at that same body temperature. I don't know about you, but I don't want to eat any fat that is solid at my body temperature because it's going to start clogging up my arteries. And that's the beauty of plant oils. They're liquid at your body temperature. They really don't cling to your arteries. Animal fats contain a substance called arachidonic acid. And arachidonic acid stimulates the creation in the body of a substance called prostaglandin 2. And prostaglandin sets off lots of inflammatory reactions in the body that can irritate the blood vessels, perhaps contributing to atherosclerosis. It may well cause a lot of inflammatory reactions in the joints, the skin, the bronchial membranes, and other places. Plant oils have a substance called linoleic acid, and that gives rise to substances called prostaglandin 1 and 3, and these are natural anti-inflammatories. They soothe inflammation in the body. So people who are on more vegetarian diets have much less problem with inflammatory diseases. Fundamental difference. You have no need to take animal fats into your bodies at all, and I really suggest you meet all your fat needs, and we need about 50 grams of fat a day. Get it from plant oils. You find it in grains have oils, legumes have oils, nuts, seeds. There's lots of oils available in the plant kingdom. That's where you should meet your oil needs, not from the fat of animals. The other thing about fats is make you fat. Animal fats stick to you. When you eat fats of animals, those fats wash through your bloodstream, and as they cross as they flow through your fat stores under your skin, they stick there. You've got fat cells looking for pre-made fats, and you eat the fat of animals, they stick there. What you see hanging on this man's abdomen really isn't even his fat. That is the fat of all the cows and pigs and chickens and ducks and turkeys and other slow animals that were walking past his table when he had a fork in his hand. Not his fat. The good news is, if he changes his diet and starts eating rice and vegetables and good plant-based foods, this stuff melts away, and people get leaner. It certainly happened to me. Remember the old nursery rhyme of Jack Sprat, if he ate no fat, his wife could eat no lean? You always see Jack portrayed as a lean fella because he ate no animal fats. Mrs. Sprat's always seen sitting down. She has a hard time getting up. Her knees hurt her, her blood pressure goes up, her diabetes gets out of control, so she's usually sitting down. The lesson of Jack Sprat was certainly not lost on me, because back in the operating room in Vancouver, here I was, and now I'm the anesthetist, and I'm standing at the head of the table looking down into the surgical wound, and I'm seeing all this fat in these people's arteries. And I did most of my growing up on a dairy farm in Wisconsin. I've been milking cows since I was 6 and driving tractors since I was 8. And not only was Mr. Phillips eating all these animals, but so was Dr. Klepper. And I was eating cheese and chickens and various other slow animals, and I was getting concerned. Not only should my patients not run all that fat to their bloodstream, but this old doc shouldn't either. So I said to myself, if you don't have to run all this fat to your bloodstream, must you? What is the nutrients in meats and dairy products that if you don't eat them, you're going to be deficient of? So I opened up my books on biochemistry and physiology and nutrition, and guess what I found? There is absolutely no nutrient, no protein, no vitamin, no mineral, no nothing found in meats and dairy products that you cannot obtain on a plant-based foods. Consider the biggest animals on the planet, elephants and buffaloes and giraffes. These are vegetarian animals. They grow to thousands of pounds of muscle and bone without ever eating cheeseburgers and pepperoni pizzas. We can do the same. We can certainly build our 140 pounds or whatever it is you need to build in your body. The human body has absolutely no nutritional requirements for animal flesh. If you open up Harrison's textbook of internal medicine, you will find no disease listed acute cow flesh deficiency. And there is no chronic chicken flesh deficiency. There is no such disease because we have no need for these substances whatsoever. Animal fats, they clog you up and they make you fat. 2 good reasons not to eat them. Here's a couple of more. It seems to be fairly clear as study after study comes out that if you are eating large amounts of fats in your diet, you are significantly raising your risk for cancer. If you are a woman eating a lot of fat in your diet, and that's talking about the hidden fat in cheeses and meats, etc., you increase your risk of cancer of the breast. Here are some countries that are compared by how much fat is eaten versus how many women die of breast cancer. And you can see that the Americans and the Dutch, with their big dairy industries, lead the way in not only fat consumption, they lead the way in breast cancer deaths. Thailand is a Buddhist country. They eat very little meat and dairy products, and breast cancers are so rare there, if you find a case of it, you report it at Grand Rounds. This seems to be a disease of diet, of a high-fat diet. If I were a woman with breasts and I wanted to decrease my chances of getting breast cancer, I would get the fat out of my diet. And that includes excessive amounts of vegetable oil. You need a little bit of vegetable oil, but you don't want to slather 2 cups of corn oil over your spaghetti for any reason. Men are not spared the ravages of a high-fat diet either, because when a man eats lots of animal fats, those fats are turned into male hormones called androgens. And androgens stimulate the prostate gland to get big. In our society, when a man reaches 60 or 70 and his prostate gland gets big, his doctor puts his arm around the patient and says, well, George, that's just part of getting old, your prostate gland's getting big. No, it's not. That's 70 years of running androgen through that prostate gland. No wonder that gland gets big, and prostate cancer is the #1 killer of men. And if you compare countries of the world versus how much fat is eaten and how much men die of prostate cancer, sorts out just the same way. The more fat that is eaten in the country, the more the men die of prostate cancer. And again, it's a very rare disease in Thailand, where people eat rice and vegetables and traditional foods. So, animal fats. They clog you up, they make you fat, and they increase your risk for a number of types of cancers. There's 3 good reasons not to eat animal fats, and as I said, there's absolutely no reason to eat them ever. Now, I'm describing problems with eating animal flesh. They have too much fat, and that includes chicken and fish. Fish has a tremendous amount of fat and cholesterol in it, and chicken flesh is very fatty food. If you ever watch your mother make chicken soup, you ever see all that fat that rises up to the top there? Well, don't kid yourself that chicken is lean meat. It is not. There's just as much fat and cholesterol in chicken as there is in beef. Animal muscle is animal muscle, and when you eat it, it raises the level of fat in your blood, and you do not need it. There's another problem with eating animal flesh. It has too much protein. Now, when I was in medical school, I never heard the words too much protein. I thought the more protein, the better. Put them on a high-protein diet and make them strong. Tain't so. You better believe there's such a thing called too much protein, and most North Americans suffer from it. First of all, what is protein? Protein is the building block material that you use to make the hard structures of your body. Your fingernails are made of protein, your hair is made of protein, your bones are made of protein. It's the brick of our bodies, a solid substance. Now, you don't need very much protein during the day. You only need about 30 grams of protein a day. That's the weight of 10 pennies, okay? Imagine 10 pennies in your hand, that's how much protein you need. But look how much protein the typical North American consumes. On a typical North American eating day, a typical American who has bacon and eggs for breakfast and a glass of milk, who has a cheeseburger and milkshake lunch, and has a beefsteak dinner with a glass of milk and some ice cream for dessert, is clipping along at 150 grams of protein. That is a 5-day supply of protein. That is too much protein. Why? Because your body can't store protein. You can store fats, you can store carbohydrates, you can't store protein. So what happens? Well, your liver starts breaking down that protein, and as it metabolizes it, it releases all sorts of toxic nitrogen-containing wastes like urea and ammonia and amino acid fragments. And these have a detrimental effect on the body, because as all these amino acid wastes go through your kidneys, it makes you lose calcium out of your urine. Why does that happen? Because there's fundamental differences between animal protein and plant protein. And I'm talking about the protein in meats and dairy products. Animal proteins contains amino acids that have sulfur, and sulfur makes extra acid in the body. And as acids wash through the bone, they dissolve calcium out of the bones. Plants have much less acid. Animal protein is very concentrated. The muscle of an animal is the most concentrated protein on the planet, and so there's a big bolt of protein that goes into your bloodstream as soon as you eat it. Plant protein is mixed up with fiber. When you eat whole grain rice or whole grain barley, it takes hours for that to be absorbed into your bloodstream. The absorption time is much, much slower. So the less acid nature of plant protein and its slower absorption rate means it's much gentler in the body, and it doesn't pull calcium out of your body. That's a very significant phenomenon. The phenomenon of protein pulling calcium out of your body is appropriately called protein-induced hypercalciuria, too much calcium going out in the urine. What I'm saying is, and it's well documented, when you eat a big bolt of animal protein, whether it be red meat or chicken or fish or even milk, the acid nature of the protein washes through the bones, dissolves the calcium, which then goes out in the urine. And what I'm telling you is that every time you eat a piece of chicken, every time you eat a piece of fish, ladies, for the next 3 or 4 hours, you urinate calcium out of your body down the toilet. And the investigators who've documented this many times clearly say that high protein diets cause a negative calcium balance, even in the presence of more than adequate dietary calcium. Even if you are taking calcium tablets and drinking milk, protein is such a potent yanker-outer of calcium out of your body that you will not be able to keep up with the calcium loss. Does that ring a bell with anybody? It did with the investigators. They said that osteoporosis, thin, crumbly bones that fracture easily, would seem to be an inevitable outcome of continued consumption of a high-protein diet. In our society, we are told that the cause of osteoporosis is not chewing up enough calcium tablets or not drinking enough cow's milk. And you're really told to believe this. There's a lot of medical evidence that says this just is not so. And this was clearly shown, I feel, in a study that was released by Cornell University recently, done by Dr. Colin Campbell, where they investigated thousands of people in the Republic of China. And they found that in this country, essentially osteoporosis is unheard of. They don't get osteoporosis. And women make it into their 80s, having nursed 5 children, and they have nice, strong bones. And yet here is a country that consumes essentially no dairy products. The milk isn't available, the cows aren't available, the refrigeration isn't available. They get all their calcium out of grains and greens and fruits and vegetables, and they don't get osteoporosis because they are eating grains and vegetables, and it doesn't make them urinate out their calcium. But it's been clearly shown as the Chinese folks move to the cities, get more affluent, and start eating more meat in their diet, they start losing calcium, and then the osteoporosis appears. It's really becoming apparent that osteoporosis seems to be not so much a disease of calcium deficiency, it's a disease of protein excess. You see osteoporosis in the countries that consume the most protein. In the United States, in Scandinavia, in Europe, and in Australia. That's where you see osteoporosis. You don't see it in China, you don't see it in rural South America, you don't see it in rural Asia, where people are eating grains and vegetables. And I'll tell you, dairy products are no protection against osteoporosis because the Americans and the Canadians and the Scandinavians are the people who drink more milk and eat more cheese than anybody else on planet Earth, and they have the worst osteoporosis on the planet. And if dairy products protected you from osteoporosis, you wouldn't see it in North America. And you see just the opposite. Because there's so much protein in dairy products that it actually puts you in negative calcium balance, makes you urinate out your calcium. And Dr. Recker's study clearly showed this. They gave women 3 8-ounce glasses of milk a day for a year, and they were still in negative calcium balance because there's so much protein in milk. Don't rely on dairy products for your calcium. Get it out of grains and greens and fruits and vegetables, but most important, hold on to your calcium by getting all that chicken and fish flesh out of your kidneys and out of your body and out of your bones. There's been studies comparing the bone density of vegetarian women versus meat-eating women, and clearly the vegetarian ladies hold on to their calcium better than the meat-eating women because they're not eating all that protein. The third problem with the North American diet, outside of having too much fat and too much protein, is that it has very little fiber in it. Plant fiber are the starches and sugars in plant foods that are not absorbed out of the intestine into the bloodstream. They stay in the intestine. They pass through the intestine. These plant fibers draw water into the intestine. They make for a nice soft fecal material, makes for nice normal bowel function. And very importantly, when meat is eaten, and the meat gets down to the colon, the large intestine, the bacteria in the